Hi, guys, and welcome to Specimens. My name is Elle, and I'm the host of this podcast. I'm so excited to have you here with me. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. It's my great privilege to have you. If you're not new to the podcast, then thank you so much for your continued support. Can you believe we're almost at 20 episodes? No, I can't believe it either. It's absolutely crazy. But I'm super excited that 20 people, 20 remarkable people have sat down with me, given up their time so honorably, and spoken to me about the incredible work that they do. The whole objective of this podcast is to get us inspired about the natural world, and these people are keeping the wheels moving in conservation in a big way, so definitely go and check them out. They will change your feeds on Twitter and Instagram into the most remarkable, inspiring content, so go and have a look at them. There's always more further reading in the show notes. And it kind of brings me to the guest today, who is, you're just going to fall in love with him. He is amazing. He is so charismatic, engaging, intelligent. He knows his subject inside out, and he's just done some incredible work. And he's only young, not to patronize, because I think we're the same age, but he's just brilliant, and I'm so excited to tell you a little bit more about what he does in a moment. But before I do that, I just want to say, if you're supporting us on Patreon, thank you so much. Your support means the world. This podcast is entirely edited, produced, funded, and put together by me, and whilst it is a labour of love, it definitely has its cost, both in time and money. So thank you so much if you're supporting. You can support us for less than $1.50 a month, and that's about £1 a month if you're in the UK. So please go and check us out. It's at Specimens Pod. But there's enough of the boring stuff. I really want to introduce today's guest. My guest today is Dan O'Neill. He is a wildlife filmmaker, documentary presenter, and conservation biologist. Hugely passionate about science communication and the way that film can communicate science to us, get us excited and engaged with the natural world and how we can save it and protect it. He actually started his very own film festival that brings awe-inspiring, thought-provoking wildlife short films from independent filmmakers across the globe on tour to the public. He's just an incredible role model for so many reasons that we're going to get into in the episode, and I really hope that you love him as much as I do. One last thing. You're never ever going to be stuck for something to watch aimlessly scrolling through trailers on Netflix, because Dan has got you covered for the foreseeable future with his incredible documentaries that he's going to tell you about right now. Dan, I'm so thrilled to have you here on my podcast. How are you doing?
Very well. Thank you very much for having me.
It's my absolute pleasure. I'm so excited to talk to you, and I'm so excited to get into all of the incredible work that you've undertaken, especially recently. But before I do that, I would love if you could take me right back to the beginning. It's the same place that I always start with all of my guests. Tell me a little bit about where you grew up and if this environment kind of impacted any love for the natural world.
First of all, absolutely. I grew up in, but when I was a kid, I grew up in Oxford, in the countryside, so quite a bit outside, and we grew up in the woods. And me and my brother kind of had like red kites flying above. A lot more now that we've had the reintroduction. Buzzards, there's woodpeckers. We'd see hedgehogs quite often. Those fluffy, great big foxes that you get typically in the more rural areas. And then we actually also then moved, because of my dad's work, to rural California when I was a kid. Yeah, so we had this kind of like complete and total culture change, but also the wildlife is incredibly different. There's banana slugs, these great big, huge yellow slugs, and Anna's hummingbirds. And I went to school with a resident green-winged macaw that sat outside. So it was completely amazing. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is so awful for British nature lovers. I am one as well. But I was like, these animals are so much cooler than the ones we have back home. And I think that little tiny experience, because we were only there for around 18 months, was where I really developed my obsession with South American and American animals, because once we'd started up there, and the macaw is obviously South and Central American, I kind of hit my sights on the Amazon. And it was from that early age. And my dad was a big adventurer, but was actually a physicist and computer programmer. So most of his life, even though he loved the idea of being outside, was spent in an office and a very small spot watching his computer. So me and my brother were very lucky because of that need for him to go and experience the world and to get out of the kind of job that he was in, we went sailing, and he was obsessed with sailing. So we sailed in Central America, the Caribbean, all over these places for like a few weeks of every year when I was a kid. And that was obviously such an amazing thing to get to experience at such a young age. But even though my sea legs aren't great, and I do very, very, very seasick. And I was like, whoa. I'm exactly the same. When we hit land on these little islands, that like not many people had been to or get to go to, we'd see kind of like endemic wildlife. We'd understand island ecosystems a little bit better. You get to meet people that you would never otherwise get to meet. And I think that's where that love of the Amazon culture and wildlife really hit home. And that's when I started being like, I'm going to study zoology and make this.
Okay, so you segued perfectly to what I was about to ask you. At what point did all of this love and this passion and this culture kind of inform more of an academic pursuit? I mean, I have to say, I am so jealous. I'm so jealous because, I mean, yes, as a British nature lover, we do have great wildlife, but the Californian wildlife and South America, Central America, I mean, it just tops it all, doesn't it? And we'll get into that a little bit more. But yes, take me to your academic background. So you said you wanted to study zoology.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about that academic journey. When did you actually start documenting your zoological findings?
So this is an interesting one because, like, I like many people who are younger and they're flip-flopping, I loved art. I was really into art. I loved drama and theatre studies, and I didn't know what I wanted to do at school. And I think it's important to like say these things because I wasn't a straight road for me. And I left school when I was 16. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do after GCSEs, and I loved wildlife. I loved it. I kind of obviously had this kind of back of the head dream of loving the idea of becoming a presenter or working in wildlife TV, but I just saw no realistic route into that. I didn't know how people did it, and so I did like charity film schools, and I made really embarrassing short films, like one about me like dressed as a clown. I mean, it's ridiculous. I don't really know what was going on, to be honest. But that's where the film side of things happened. But I loved biology at school, and then I kind of went on this. Had this realization where I was like, I love biology and all the other things that I loved at school. The one that I was like quite good at, but like just always had a fascination with ever since I was a little kid, like playing with slow worms in the next door neighbor's garden, and like it's like finding the bird with a broken wing in the classroom and trying to send it off. Like those sorts of things were like the most enduring and didn't feel like fads in my life. They felt like that was the one central unit, like the one central theme that was always there. And so I was like, I'm going to do zoology, but I had to go back to school because I didn't have any A levels and I needed to fix that. So I was only a year behind, but I went to a local community college and I did access to higher education, and I did biology, chemistry and mathematics, and I worked my butt off. Didn't go out for an entire year, which at that age was very difficult, only on my birthday. Like I did really well in that, and I really, really tried and worked really hard, and then went to Sheffield University to study zoology, which is kind of like totally changed my life. Going there and being just doing zoology, just doing animal biology, and having lecturers that were like obsessed with fungi and like ectomycorrhizal interactions that happen between trees and fungi underneath. It's so amazing. And just this whole world of possibility because you can choose your modules, you can do so many different things. And I could pick modules that associated themselves almost entirely with tropical forests. And during that time, I got a placement to go out to Guyana, and I've been going there for the past nearly 10 years now. So,
my goodness, it's such a phenomenal journey. And it's really interesting that you sort of touched on the fact that you were an artistic person, or you had that inclination, and then you had to separate yourself and go back to study zoology and biology. Because as I've discussed with other guests in previous episodes, it's really interesting how throughout our education system, whether that's in the UK or elsewhere, it's very much taught to us that it's art versus science, and there's not this integration between the two, which obviously as somebody who, as a taxidermist, I mean, I'm marrying the two every day. So with what you do, being on screen, but coming from a data research point of view, you're both the actor and the researcher. So it's really interesting to look at how these two practices and genres merge together so much more than we give credit for in the academic system.
Absolutely. And film is as well. Film is art. Precisely. I mean, when you're making a wildlife documentary, which is what we're doing here, it's all art. You go and you collect this story, and it's important to like collect the obvious story and tell the truth because it's a documentation. You're telling the truth by making a doc, but there is an artistry about it because you have to make a 5-act structure. You're telling a story, and you have to like build it up and create this narrative, and it's very artistic. You're basically the editor is like painting the story using the information they have. So it's weird when you say it like that, but actually it has kind of like ended up like all those things that I loved before I'm doing now in some form.
Yeah, it's an amazing marriage, and it's really wonderful to see that you're able to tap into what was clearly a passion. I think it really helps to propel your subject and your passion when it's driven by something that genuinely motivates you. Obviously, you love animals. Obviously, you love wildlife and biodiversity and biology, but it helps to have that foundation in being on screen, the
Mm,
theatre, the filming, the acting.
yeah.
So you mentioned there briefly in that wonderful tale that you went out on your first placement to Guyana. Can you talk to me a little bit about this project? I know you've been going there ever since, but I'd love to know kind of the inception and what it felt like to be out in the field for the first time.
Oh my God. I mean, I could drone on about Guyana for
Please do.
it's the most spectacular place you could possibly imagine. Basically, I'd gone on this. I was basically asked by this scientist to go on this project in Honduras, and then it flipped around, and there was this opening to go to a country in South America I'd never heard of, and there were only 14 people going on this project at the time, and we went out there to this, and obviously I was like, yeah, sounds really fun and really like rough and ready and exactly what I want to be doing. And when we went out there, and Guyana is a totally amazing place. The population is roughly that of Liverpool, the entire
Okay.
country. It's about the size of the UK, but it's a tiny little population. Is almost 95% on the coastal strip in the capital city Georgetown. 85% of the country is pristine, intact tropical rainforest, and there is only one road that goes from the capital city Georgetown right through the country called the Linden Letham Trail, and it's dirt road. It's like really full of potholes. In the rainy season, I went there. We had to get out and drag the car and push the car out. So spectacular to get to this forest called Iwakrama, which is 1 million acres of forest that was given by Guyana a few decades ago to the Commonwealth for sustainable research and development. And the
Wow.
whole concept of the area is this 1 million acres is half of it is separated off into a wilderness preserve that nobody touches and there's no activity on it. And the other side is a sustainable utilization area of
Wow.
logging activity. So what they'll do is there's a mill site. So it actually looks like when you see that mill site, it looks like that's deforestation. And if you were to
Yeah.
be there and look at it, it looks quite destructive, but it's exactly the opposite because that mill site has existed since Iwakrama's inception and it has never changed in size. And that is basically where the logging happens from. And what the scientist, Dr. Raquel Thomas, she's a really good friend of mine, absolutely brilliant scientist, badass lady boss that like runs Iwakrama, is in charge of a lot of the forestry stuff that happens there. So what they do is they'll do DBH checks of all of the commercial tree species in the sustainable utilization section of Iwakrama, and they will chop down just a very small subset of the trees that are there in a really sustainable area. By the point that we flew our drone over the top of the forest, and the area that they're logging is this tropical intact forest, and you could not tell a single tree that's been chopped down.
Wow.
It is they have this amazing method of using without losing the
Yeah.
rainforest, and it's so exciting to be part of something like that where they're showing. And what Raquel always says is conservation without money is just a conversation, and it's reigns so true.
Mhm.
It needs to create jobs for the local Amerindian people there. It needs to have a value, because if the forest doesn't have a value, a monetary value,
Yeah.
it's incredibly easy to get rid of it. And so
Mhm.
do this very scientific method of finding the right trees, taking them out, and it saves the rainforest. And what I did originally when I went out there was basically just as a research assistant working on a project, collecting data on both the sustainable utilization area and the wilderness preserve to see through camera trap data for like bats. We would catch bats at night, and basically we were doing a species diversity study.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
the two areas, and we found very little difference in the two areas in terms of abundance. There's a little behavioral changes, like in areas where there's logging, tapirs, jaguars, and things like that, are a little bit more nocturnal. They'll come out more at night. But in wilderness preserve areas, they're a little bit more active during the day. And actually, we were just there, and we'll probably go into this later. But when you're in really remote places, there that you see tapirs in the middle of the day, just sat in the river, and it is absolutely amazing. But I fell in love with Guyana. I mean, Guyana is it was the inspiration for Arthur Conan Doyle's book, The Lost World. And when you're there, you really feel that sense of being in a lost world. The entire northern Amazonia is this giant granite dome called the Guyana Shield. And that what creates Venezuela, top parts of Colombia, and the Guyanas, French Guyana, Suriname, and Guyana. And it's this rock formation that forms those huge tabletop mountains, tepuis, that have like lost worlds on top with endemic species that nobody's ever seen before. So it is absolutely spectacular, and one of the amazing formations that forms is places like Kaye Falls, which is by volume the largest single drop waterfall in the world, and you should look it up because it looks absolutely breathtaking. And we took this tiny little. We were just there a couple months ago, and we took this tiny little four-seater, rusty old book plane and flew over Kaye and flew around it and landed there. We got some shots out the window, and it literally just looks ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It looks like something from a story or a cartoon. Yeah, it's really amazing. As I said, yeah, I could drone on about Guyana all day. I literally could. I've got so many stories.
I mean, I loved in that the casual mention of the jaguar. I mean, I can't even, some of the experience that you've had, it's head spinning. I mean, to be able to go to these places where there are endemic species that some of us might never even learn about in our lifetime, it's just such a privilege, and it's so exciting that you're on the ground doing this amazing work. And I'm so excited to learn about more of the things that you've done. But what I wanted to know is that, talking about some of these remote locations and being where there are wild animals that perhaps are, they're protected, it's essentially their home and you're entering it. How do you approach a project where it is remote and you need to keep safe? Is it about understanding and respecting the biodiversity, or is it a hell of a lot more about kind of survival skills?
For me, it's definitely about respecting the environment. I think there's this kind of bravado, like I would even say hypermasculine idea of like having to survive in this really domineering and commanding way. But actually, I think it's much more about respect, because you're respecting the environment. The animals are respectful animals, and they have their niche and their life, and they have their routine and their evolutionary history that leads them to do certain things. Like if a jaguar sees a human, it's not going to attack that human. The cases of jaguar-human conflict is incredibly low, and it's only really seen when you're threatening their cubs, or when when it's like conflict between farmers and cattle ranchers and jaguars. But really, if you're in the jungle and a jaguar sees you, it's almost like when we see a stripy snake. We're not going to go up to it and take a bite, are we? Because we don't know what that animal is. And when there's enough food going around, which in the Amazon there really is, it's a very, biodiverse but very abundant place for wildlife. They're going to go for things like paca or labber, forest rat, capybara. They'll look for tapirs. And so you really are just a bit more of a thing that's sat on the side for them. I mean, I find it because, there's cases occasionally of mistaken identity if someone's like by the river and they've curled themselves up and they might look a bit like an armadillo and a jaguar might jump on it. That's incredibly, probably 1 to 2 cases that's ever been recorded ever in history. And it's the same with snakes. If you're smart about it and you kind of like rake your area when you're setting a camp and putting up your hammock, the snakes don't want to attack you. And I think when you meet the Amerindians who haven't got this kind of commanding attitude, or they haven't been taught that that's what an explorer, this classic idea for hundreds of years, what an explorer should be. They're very quiet, they're very reserved, they're very kind, they're really chilled out, and respectful of the environment. And that's where I gain a lot of my understanding, and that's where I like to take lessons from. It's from people like who've lived there that's their home. I see documentaries about exploration, and you're like, these places aren't being explored. They're not being explored. Maybe someone from the West has never been there, but people have lived in these environments for hundreds of years, thousands of years. Some parts of the Amazon have been occupied by humans for 11,000 years. And when we were just on our most recent journey, it was me and my mates who are indigenous guys. They're my mates. We take the piss out of each other. They're hilarious. They're really funny people. Me and Ash, Shannon, Rambo, his name's Ramland, but everyone calls him Rambo. Josie and Joyce, like we relax into our friendship, and we're going up here, and it's very clear that this is their home. They live here so seamlessly, but like as we're going up, we're seeing Amerindian petroglyphs that have existed there for hundreds or thousands of years, of depictions of monkeys, of waves, of fish, kind of like those old symbols of like road signs where they'd get to a waterfall site and they'd be like, there are loads of monkeys around here. And so they probably etch into it monkey sign, which means like anyone coming up, or for a reminder for themselves potentially, this is a good place to find monkeys, this is a good place to find fish. And it's really cool to be going up there and being part of that story. And that's how I see it. It's a story about a place that is occupied.
And I think that's so important with your storytelling, because your filmmaking is storytelling. It's about showing the true, authentic side of things, rather than painting an image, like you mentioned earlier, of this stereotypical, exploration. It's telling the story of the people and the whole picture put together. And I think that's something that your filmmaking does so well. From the stuff that I've watched, I mean, you're so in tune with the environment, and I mean, even emotional and vulnerable in some of the things that I've watched you in. I think that's how you connect so viscerally, is that it's very truthful. And I wonder if, it's just you're successful because you are authentic, as opposed to reading off a script. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally. And I think there's an element of that kind of old style of presenting, which is like, it isn't really you. And I'm not saying there's anything against it, because actually there's a place for that. It's really exciting. But like, I think that we're moving into a world now where there's like a lot of like communication between these people. We're trying to spotlight people from all different sorts of walks of life. And I think when you're making a documentary now, when we understand the issues of climate change, we understand the issues of extinction, and like spotlighting people from every single walk of life, especially those who are most affected in the most affected areas, is what's important. And so I think that for me, when you're telling a wildlife documentary, it's vital to tell the stories of people who are actually living there, who's actually got the voice. Because, we had this in snow leopards. When we did the snow leopard series for BBC Earth, it was very important to everyone on our team in the NHU to tell the people's story, to create an impact that would help them, rather than just going there and filming the snow leopard, or just following my journey and making it like, oh, I'm going to set the camera traps now, I'm going to find this information out, it's me. Being a fly on the wall and actually going and following these incredible rangers who have these amazing like lives and do so many different jobs alongside Kuban, this fantastic scientist who's been maverick in his ability to like galvanize people to save snow leopards. That's who we wanted to focus on. And I think it shows in the quality of the production that the people from the Snow Leopard Trust got in touch with us, and they're like, this is what we need. They can now show that series, and it answers some of the topic, it covers some of the key topics that they're most interested in sharing. And it creates a relationship that now when the people go there in the future from a film crew, they're not going to have a bad taste in their mouth. And I found that in Guyana especially, where some film crews have come and they've told the wrong story, or they've twisted the words, and just for entertainment, and it scared them off film crews. And film is such a powerful tool for sharing conservation messages that, like, when you do that, you're really damaging the future of something. So yeah.
Absolutely, especially these sort of sacred places that are not only sacred because we've got to protect them with regards to biodiversity and conservation, but also sacred because they are the people's places too. They're not just homes for the animals, but like you say, they give people monetary focus, they give them purpose every day they're getting up. It's not just sacred for the animals. It's a whole.
Yeah, and food.
Of course.
Like, people think about like Amerindian culture and they're scared about like hunting or bushmeat. And I'm thinking, like, when we're there, I mean, they hunt in the forest. They don't have Tesco. They don't have that is their Tesco. So like, it's so important for them to like connect to this idea of conservation, and they are the stewards of those environments, but they use them as well. And it's so interesting to like tap into that.
Absolutely. I mean, we've talked about some of the more, I suppose, purist and poetic sides to things, and we will come back to that. But I would love to kind of do a little bit of a handbrake turn and talk about some of the sides to things that are perhaps a little bit harder, especially with regards to wildlife conflict, which I know is something that you studied and had focus for your PhD. First of all, can you tell me a little bit about how you got into that as a line of focus for your PhD?
So I'm doing my PhD right now. And it's on the effects of conflict zones on wildlife populations. And yeah, for me personally, it was when we were in Philippines shooting a film, Queen of Birds, that we about the Philippine eagle, the most critically endangered bird of prey on the planet. And there's only 400 pairs of them left in the wild. And a very large proportion of those wild individuals live in rebel-occupied forests that are otherwise empty because of the rebel occupation. And that was really interesting to me, because immediately you would think when war comes into an area or conflict, and it does, and this is definitely the case, but you would assume that it always has some kind of negative impact. But actually, there are some cases where war has had an interesting kind of potentially positive impact. If you look at Las FARC in Colombia, many forest areas that had Las FARC active in, the guerrillas, were protecting forests from logging, from concessions, from mining, all of these different things. And so actually a lot of conservationists are quite worried about the post-war period after that. And it actually, that kind of idea, like communism as a protector of wildlife, is not new, because in the Soviet occupied areas of Kyrgyzstan, for example, after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, 80% nearly of snow leopards were wiped out, because local areas and local communities went straight to the natural environment after subsidies and extras were stopped after the Soviet Union collapsed. So it's really interesting. There's a lot of kind of like nuance with war and these things. And also another incredible but very specific example is the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea is a total haven for wildlife. Some people even believe that there might still be Amur tigers or Siberian tigers living in that cordoned off cold zone between North and South Korea, but there's definitely Asiatic black bears. There could be Amur leopards in there. It's a very important global site for a critically endangered species of birds. It's really interesting. So I think it started in the Philippines when I was looking at that story, and then kind of like divulged into this realization that there's loads of kind of interlinking things, and now turning that into something that can have like a more of a focused scientific question is what we're at. So I'm kind of right now just looking at the kind of what's out there and synthesizing all of the information and what we could look at. And over the PhD, we'll be kind of looking at lots of different areas, but then probably zooming in to one specific area eventually, maybe Colombia.
Gosh, it's so interesting. I mean, you're educating me so much about a world that I didn't know. I mean, just to talk about the prospect of there being critically endangered species out there, they're perhaps just living their life unaffected. It's remarkable, and I'm so excited because the work that you're doing is shining a light on these crises. So it's just so interesting. But I have so many questions, so I'm going to move us on slightly. I feel like I'm jumping around a little bit, so I do apologize. But I want
doing exactly the same.
But we're talking so seamlessly about some of the work that you're doing, you know, being out in the field. But one of the projects that I kind of came across when I was researching was your project to culminate the end of your master's degree. And I'll let you tell that story. It was a very emotional watch, that's all I'll say. But it was beautiful and very interesting, especially as a bird lover. But I'll let you tell that story.
To find a harpy, yeah?
Yeah.
So yeah, I was unbelievably lucky to get a place on this fantastic master's. God knows why they let me in.
I can think of a few reasons, Dan.
It was I was like, bloody hell, all right, thanks guys. But this amazing master's degree run by a fantastic guy called Peter Venn. He's the course director for the master's program, partnered with the BBC Natural History Unit at UE Bristol. And they let in around 15, 16 people per year to this 1 year program where they kind of give you all holds barred kind of like look into wildlife filmmaking. You're partnered with the Natural History Unit producer from the BBC, and they like work with you on your final production after doing a huge number of different parts of the industry, learning a lot different parts of the industry like risk assessments, how to fundraise, storytelling, learn about sound, editing, camera work, all of these different things. And then you go off and you make your production. And we've had some incredible films come out of it in the past. A friend of mine, Lindsay Parietti, made this brilliant film. It's available online called Blood Island. And she actually won a BAFTA for it.
Wow.
Her student film, and really amazing, about Liberian rescue chimps and a history of abuse from vaccination trials for hepatitis and what happened to those chimps. It's really, really stunning film. But
sounds like a tearjerker.
It really is, and actually, it's totally brilliant. And I would urge anyone listening to this and watching this to check out that film because it is beautiful. available on YouTube, actually on my YouTube channel, Wilderland. But from that, I went off. I took a bird watcher actually to Guyana because obviously I've been going there so much, and I took a bird watcher, this incredible girl called Natasha, who I found on Twitter. Actually, I put out this open call, being like, "We have found this incredible nest of a harpy eagle in the jungle." And I would love to see if there's harpies in it. I would love to see if we could take somebody who wants to see this bird more than anything in the world and give them the chance to go and find it. And I assumed at first that I was going to find like an old bloke or an old lady who's kind of been trying to do this for a long time and never succeeded. And I got this strange message from this girl, Natasha, being like, "Hello, I want to do this so bad. I know you're not going to pick me, and I know I'm not who you're looking for, but can I pay and come anyway?" And I was like, "Holy shit, this girl really loves." Sorry, holy hell! This girl looks like she loves Harpy Eagles, and we had a Zoom call, and I don't know, I just connected to her, and I just thought, yeah, let's do it. And we went off together to Guyana, met all of my mates, and went into the jungle to try and make this dream of hers come true of seeing a harpy eagle in the wild. And I mean, I'm not going to give away too much of it to see what actually happened. But yeah, I mean, from a mathematician from Sheffield, whose kind of like worlds hadn't been opened in this way, to go into the middle of the jungle, sleep in a hammock, and try and find this very large, very rare forest raptor. Yeah, it was quite intense for my master's film. But yeah, I'm so proud of what we did. I mean, I look at that film now and I see so many errors, as everybody does with any piece of work that they've done more than a year ago. But I'm intensely proud of it. It opened so many doors for me, and it was such a beginning into my career that, yeah, I love that film, and I hope people watch it. The music was done by a friend of mine called Miles McLeod, an amazing composer for film and television now, who, we did masters. He was doing a master's in film and television composition at the time. I was doing that one, and we partnered together, and he did my film and I did that one. And now we're working together again in the industry. So, yeah.
I love the way that everything's folding into each other. It's so organic. The way you're talking about these experiences, being in the rainforest, finding a harpy eagle, you're saying it with so much kind of colloquialism. And I wonder if, your experience growing up in California, like you said at the top, has just kind of, you've got this very mature approach to being in these environments, but do you ever find that your emotion does overspill? How do you separate yourself from the little boy who's fascinated with the environment and the researcher and the filmmaker and the assignment brief? Because there has to come a point where there is professional Dan. How do you bring yourself to a project that requires 100% commitment in all areas?
That's a really interesting question. I don't know. I find that I've definitely amalgamated all of them together now. And that, for me, I know this sounds really awful, but if I see something and I'm not filming it, it feels like such a waste now. And it's become a point where I don't really go on holiday because actually genuinely I have so much more enjoyment from making a story out of it. That is my getting away. When I go away, it's all I want to do. Like that, I don't ever want to go on holiday and do anything else. And I think that that's all the passions have led in together now. All the things that I've loved so much, I've tried to turn them into something. And I mean, there is a point, I would say that the hardest part's in the edit. I mean, that's when I really start to die. I just can't do it. I'm so bad. I'm so slow. I love working with editors. I don't know how they do it. They're the most amazing, patient people in the world. But I sometimes when you haven't got a camera, and actually what I would say is once you've got an incredible shot of something and then that thing keeps on happening, then you can put the camera down and really just experience how wonderful it is. We saw quite a few tapirs recently on our trip. And then after a while, tapirs weren't, we didn't need to film anymore. And actually just sitting there and watching such a strange animal live out its life that's when you start to sit down and go, wow, this is unbelievable that I'm in this situation. Because I'd never seen a tapir before I'd been to one specific point in Guyana. And when you first see an animal, that's what's so great about presenting. Because actually, at the end of the day, even though you might have your fingers in other aspects of the production or whatever, you might be researching, you might be producing, whatever. when you actually get that first encounter, like when I first saw a jaguar and it was being filmed, that was like 8 years for me of wanting to see this animal, like camera trapping, never seeing it in real life, being with taking university students out to Mexico, for example. I worked there for a couple of months, and they saw a jaguar I was there for 2 months, and students would come for 2 weeks and they would see a jaguar, and I would be like, I've never seen one. I can't believe this. It's just 8 years I've wanted to see a jaguar. And then when we went up to this remote river, and I can't express to you how unbelievably like this relief, and like it feels like you're looking at something that, like finding a diamond. It feels like you found like this unbelievable thing that doesn't exist. And we were staring at it, and it was on this horizontal log against the river, just sat there watching us, looking. It didn't care at all. I mean, when we got really close, it just stood up and quietly sauntered into the jungle. But that was just like, my heart was racing. I was sweating. I looked like absolute wreck. But and you have to really connect, and you have to really care about it, because really, as a presenter, I mean, all you are is a vector for a story, and all you're doing is kind of allowing the audience to live vicariously through what's going on. And I think it's so important to have real passion and love for a subject, because yeah, I'm so glad that it was caught on camera as well, because that was such a big moment in my life. And I think that's why I love it so much, presenting. But yeah. I probably haven't answered your question at all.
No, it's perfect. Everything you're saying is just perfect, and that's one of the things that I really loved watching your most recent work, moving through the controlled reserves in Kyrgyzstan, documenting the snow leopards. Because when you see the snow leopard, I mean, you cried and we cry with you, and I think that's how science communication actually leads to tangible outreach, and that's something that I want to talk to you a little bit about. How you feel filmmaking leads to that. But for me, as a spectator, when you see how much someone else cares about something, it makes you think, yeah, there's something here. I should be caring about this. If this person is being so moved to the point of tears, then there's a reason for that, and you sit up and listen. And I'm very interested to know how you think that your storytelling and broadcasting these stories is leading to conservation outreach, because obviously there's a lot of work on the ground already being done, but how do you think that people who are watching it on their TV, sitting in their front room, and how are they actually going to become so inspired that they're going to do something about it?
I would say it's so definitely about making sure that you're focusing on the people who actually you can look up and you can find what to do from. I mean, we're with Kuban, and we're talking about the Snow Leopard Trust, and we went in the series to visit a community who is quite literally making handicrafts that can be bought from the Snow Leopard Trust all over the world, that gives money directly to communities saving snow leopards. And we made sure that that was in there, because now people probably look at that and they're like, I might buy one of those really cool rugs. I've got one in my flat. It looks great. And that's what I think is important. It's about taking people to where they can actually do something about it. I mean, Blue Planet 2 did such an amazing job, because even though it's a blue chip series and a lot of the content in the actual series is wildlife and behavior, they had this fantastic campaign alongside it, digital campaign, where it talks about plastic pollution, it talks about the problems in the oceans, it gave people things that they could do, it gave small things that anyone can do. And I think that's what's really powerful about the digital space alongside making documentaries, but that you have this ability now to be like, if you want to find out more, go to our website, go to our Instagram, go to our Facebook, YouTube, whatever, find out information that you can use to do something about it. And also you can make funding campaigns alongside it. With Queen of Birds, we just wrapped up on a year-long crowdfunding campaign because during COVID, they've had to lose most of the money that they make through footfall, coming to the Philippine Eagles Center, which is a tourist attraction. And so we raised, I think, £5,400 for them, which goes a long way for feeding Philippine eagles and other animals that live there. So I think that's what's so powerful about it and important about it. I think there's no point in doing a documentary these days or making content unless there's some kind of higher moral value, when it is in the space of, wildlife, climate change, sustainability, because we're in this pivotal moment in the history of the world where we have to make the decision now if we're going to be the good guys or if we're going to be the bad guys. And we have to do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about the ways in which we can bring wildlife and film into people's lives brings me really nicely to something that you started fairly recently, your Wilderland Am I saying that correctly? Film
Yeah.
festival. Tell me about the inception of that project. How did that come to be, and what is your objective and your intention with that project?
Yeah, so when we were doing our masters, we kept seeing these amazing short films. I was talking to you earlier about Blood Island and the ones that I make online and other little films. And we thought there are some amazing short films in the wildlife space that people are seeing in an echo chamber of people who love and look up that kind of content that people love. I mean, the natural history big films that come out on BBC are some of the most popular things in the country when they come out. These little films made by amazing independent filmmakers all over the world are just as fantastic. And we thought that it would be such an amazing opportunity to get a showcase of these best independent short wildlife films from all over the world and take them on tour to the British public. So they can go to a theatre event and see a showcase of, 8 to 12, depending on timings, these stunning films taking you from Bornean orangutans to snow leopards in Russia to a live action drama about conservation and trophy hunting in Africa to something about connectivity and how many animals are killed by road traffic accidents in the States, all in one evening. And so you get such a chocolate box of different kinds of information that I think is such a cool way for people to connect to something that really sits with them. And it might be one thing that sits with them, it might be all of them, but it's with an entertainment focus at its heart. So all the films are entertaining, they're all really fun. And actually, after COVID, we are coming back for a small autumn tour this year with Wilderland that will be announced soon on our websites, which is wilderlandfestival.com. But we're also back with brand new films in early next year. So that's really exciting as well.
It's lovely that you're giving visibility to some of the sort of more small independent films that might just kind of get brushed under the rug. They have a small debut, but then perhaps it doesn't really get taken anywhere. So it's nice to continue to bring these films back to the fore and to take them on tour. That's lovely. And I'm very excited to watch and listen to some of the things that you've talked about. I'm sure our listeners will be as well. Dan, you have done so much, and I'm very aware that I'm not going to be able to keep you forever. So I'm going to have to move on, although I don't want to. But you have been to so many incredible destinations on this planet already. It's probably impossible for you to say because they all have different objectives and they all touch you in different ways. But have there been some standout moments? What has really been iconic for you and why? Maybe memorable for a personal reason?
I think the ones I've already spoken to you about, the jaguar and obviously the snow leopard, were unbelievable moments and definitely up there in my, equal top one. But another one that was stunning for me was we went on this project a couple of years ago to learn about the illegal wildlife trade in Vietnam, and we were following the story of this primate called the golden-headed langur or cat bar langur, which only has 66 individuals left on the planet, and they only live on one island off the coast of Vietnam, and they're incredibly prized by the Chinese medicine trade or traditional medicine trade for their bones. They make monkey wine out of these animals, and to the point where I think 30% of the population were killed in one night by poachers. But we went round the back of the restricted area of this otherwise very big tourist attraction to this pristine-looking part of Ha Long Bay in Vietnam, this stunning place that literally is breathtakingly beautiful karst mountain formations. And we saw the last monkeys of this species. We found them on the side of this cliff, and they were just living their lives. Had no idea that they were so rare. These beautiful great big orange heads and black bodies, critically endangered on the 25 most endangered primates in the world's list, and probably the most endangered in Asia. It was, really spectacular. And that was really such a strange, moving moment because they are so rare. And seeing something so rare like that and so sought after for such an insidious industry is it's quite moving. So I think that was one.
As somebody who works with animals through what I do, one of the things that I often think, and I try to detach because otherwise I would never get anything done, and I'm sure you can tell I'm very emotionally invested in what I do, but one of the things that I find is that sometimes I'll look at a specimen and think, this is maybe a native bird, perhaps an owl or something, and I'm thinking, if I have had children, there's a possibility that this animal might cease to exist because of the way that things are moving, with climate change and loss of habitat and climate, habitat breakdown and everything. So it's really amazing to have something in front of you and see it and think, my goodness, this could, this really has value now, but soon this would just change. It would just dissipate into something completely different. And I don't even know how you begin to deal with feelings of loss and feelings of overwhelmment in those situations. I mean, looking at potentially less than 20 of the last of one species. Do you ever find that it gets too much, or does it just drive you on further and harder?
The thing is, I've always considered myself a half full kind of guy. And I think there's so much hope in the world. I mean, people care more now than they ever have before. And yes, we are in a situation where, we have a rising population. There is like a subset of society that's, consuming a hell of a lot more than another subset of society and doing a lot more damage than that. And I think people are waking up to that. People are starting to change the way that they live. People are starting to change the ideals that they had previously. And yeah, maybe we're moving quite slowly now, but it's accelerating. And I think it's exciting. And when we were in Vietnam, there were old guys there who used to be poachers, and they're the ones looking after those monkeys now. And I think it's important to focus on those positive stories, because that's all you really have is hope, And I feel very hopeful. I think I'm excited by the fact that we're moving into such a more awoken era of people caring about the environment like they never have before. Gen Z, it's not cool to be unsustainable. I don't know where I was hearing it, but like there was something like what Gen Z data's like, and like what's on a Gen Z's Tinder profile. And it was like, if you're not into sustainability, then you're out. And I was like, that's pretty cool. That Gen Z are trailblazers. So that's pretty cool, and I'm excited for that. I think it's maybe some of us are a little bit behind, but it seems like the people coming up are the ones, they're the leaders of the future, and they feel like they're going to lead it in the right way.
Absolutely. I think I love that. That would get my swipe. Talking about progression and things being progressive, I hope you don't mind if I move into talking about another sort of progressive area, perhaps a little more late than we would like. And that's just talking to you a little bit about some of the recent press that you have had as of the last couple of weeks. You said in one of the articles growing up that there were no clear role models for you in the LGBTQIA plus community, specifically in wildlife broadcasting. Can you talk to me about your decision to talk so openly about your sexuality and why you felt that was important, and how you feel now that press is out there, if you feel comfortable talking about that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it was something that for years I kind of hid a bit, because, when you think about an explorer, you think about all these things that we spoke about earlier on, like you think of this hypermasculine kind of straight, white man, and that's what your vision of an explorer is. And I think it would have been for me, and I had been hiding it for a while, and I had people surprised at the idea of hearing that I was gay and doing being an adventurer or an explorer, hacking through the jungle, these sorts of things. And I had situations where people were like, oh, he's a bit camper than we expected, or saying things like, I've had it said to me before, his diversity is there, it's important to highlight those, but we can't see it, which I think is inherently wrong in so many levels. And I think the reason I started speaking about it really is because there was no one gay doing any of that stuff when I was a kid. No one. I mean, I can't think of a single person that was an adventurer, that was kind of person that I imagined myself really wanting to be, that I thought was really cool. And there are those people there. There's so many badass LGBT scientists. There's so many badass adventurers, people who do amazing things, but they just weren't being represented on screen. And so I thought, for me, a friend of mine actually spoke to me about it, and being very clinical, and I respect her about this. She was like, would you rather be well known for being a wildlife presenter, or well known for being the gay wildlife presenter? And it was a really interesting question. She was just asking me because I was thinking about talking about it in a more public way. And for me, I feel like there's no moral value in another wildlife presenter, but there is actually moral value in a gay wildlife presenter. So I mean, I'm thinking, no, I would rather have at least some kind of notoriety, or like be known for being gay, if that's something that people can find solace in, or find helpful, or be a role model for someone, because it's so important. As we said in the article, you can't be what you can't see. And when people don't see themselves in the people that they look up to, then they don't go after those positions. And I think that's what's important to do.
It's so important that people are able to see themselves and feel like they can enter these spaces. And I think that's one of the things that, there is so much progression moving in STEM and all these other fantastic genres, but there is still so many other genres that don't have representation and still feel like they're behind. So I think it's a really important thing to do now. There's no point waiting, because you're not old by any standard. So it needs to be that the next generation can look and say, yes, he's done it, let's just do it.
Yeah, and I got so many amazing messages from people all over the place being like, yes, this is so cool. Like, there's somebody who's gay doing adventurous things, like being somebody who's out and proud and being and not caring about that side of them. And actually, I lean into it. In this recent one, in this one we're editing now, like, I'm like pretty afraid of spiders and pretty afraid of snakes in the best of times. And I get quite camp when I'm afraid of stuff. And you know what? That's fine. And we're leaving that in. So I'm proud of it, bloody hell, like, needs a bit of sound. So yeah, no, I'm really proud of it now. And actually, it's helped me personally, on a personal level. It's helped me because I'm so much more open now. I'm no longer afraid of parts of me. There's like this slight bit of shame associated with things that I might have done in the past. It's just not there anymore. And like being able to speak openly and passionately about yourself, whether that's on a platform like this, or whether that's just with your friends and family, it's so empowering and it feels so good. And I'm behind it.
100%, and I am too. And anyone who's listening that feels as though they need those role models, they're out there, and you take it upon yourselves to be authentic. We talked about authenticity at the beginning of this conversation with regards to filmmaking and telling a story, and you are every part of that. So I think it's just so important to be your true authentic self. Dan, do you or can you reveal anything going forward that you're working on? I know that you have sort of alluded to a couple of things. I know that there's probably a lot of non-disclosure agreements that you've signed. Can you talk to me about any future projects that you've got lined up that we can be excited about?
So I can talk to you about this one a little bit. So we are currently making a longer form television program, which is about my journey with my long-term friends, Indigenous friends in Guyana, to find a lost world. And there's a lot of adventure, a lot of animals, and I'm not going to say any more than that. But it'll be more announcements coming soon.
We're so excited. That sounds amazing. Dan, I am so grateful for you being on the podcast. I promise that I'm going to let you go in a moment. My last question is more of a personal question. We've talked a lot about your professional career and the amazing work that you've done in such a short amount of time. I'm so excited for your future. But tell me, one of the quotations that you were quoted as giving in a recent article was that you said everybody deserves to chase their dream. Can you tell me what your dream is?
Oh God, that's such a big question. Ooh. I mean,
it can be something small. It doesn't have to be.
No, I know it's a really interesting one, because I think like I always had this kind of end goal where I was like, I really want to be like this adventure. I want to do these amazing things. I want to explore the world. I want to see everything. But like nowadays, I'm just like, live in the day, live in the moment. I mean, I'm having such a good time at the moment. I'm meeting so many amazing people, having so many collaborative conversations. And I think, you know what, the dream that I want to be living is living by the day and enjoying the moments that I'm having, rather than thinking about like a future. Because it's so great, and I'm enjoying the situation of today. I'm feeling grateful for the things that we have. Like COVID's been a bugger for everyone. It's really like ruined everyone's lives and made such a horrible thing. But I've met people during this time that I wouldn't necessarily have spoken to. I've had like conversations. I've met people like you, and we're doing this right now. And I think, my dream is always to be able to connect to people all over the world, and to to follow really interesting stories and to maybe have some kind of small benefit on the planet. And I feel like we're on our way.
Yeah.
And I think that is my dream. I think I'm living my dream.
I'm really excited for your dream.
You know what my dream right now is? My dream is for you to teach me taxidermy and me to know how to do what you do.
I will teach you taxidermy, so thank you for being my guest. I do feel like it could be a really useful skill for you, especially when you're abroad, because one of the early conversations that you and I have had is that you're requesting some information on some some things that you brought back in your suitcase.
None of them were endangered. They were like skulls that I had found, or the Amerindian guys had eaten. But yes, that was one of our early chats. And actually, you've been very helpful. They're currently in a box, awaiting a very bleak but very exciting future for them in my flat. I really want to get them mounted. We've got a piranha skull, which I'm quite excited about. You're going to help me with that.
I will help you, and just to reiterate, I've checked and everything's good and legal and above board. Dan, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for being my podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much for having me.
So there you have it, my conversation with explorer, biologist, journalist, director at BBC Earth, Dan O'Neill. And what a pleasure it was. Thank you so much to Dan for speaking with me, for giving up your time so generously, and for talking about some really important issues, but also for being vulnerable. It was a great pleasure to host you. I'm so excited for Dan's future. I have no doubts that we're looking at the very next big thing in wildlife presenting. And if you want to stay up to date with what Dan's doing and also catch up on the incredible work that he's already done and put out there, you can find him on Instagram. His handle is @DanO'Wild. That's @DanO'Wild. He's on Twitter @DanO'Neill_wild. That's Dan O'Neill with a double L _wild. He's got his YouTube channel, Wilderland TV, and we talked a little bit about snow leopards, Ghosts in the Snow. That's the documentary that was most recently put out by Dan. So go and have a look at that, watch it. It's a total tearjerker. It's really beautiful. There are quite a few other things on there that are really interesting that we didn't get time to discuss. So definitely have a look at the YouTube channel. He also mentions a couple of documentaries by other people. Those documentaries are linked in the show notes, so definitely check it out. You can catch me in all of the usual places. So I'm on Instagram Elle Kaye Taxidermy if you want a little insight in what I do day to day as a taxidermist. You can find me on Twitter @SpecimensPod and on Instagram @SpecimensPod. Don't forget, there's always more information in the show notes. There's further reading, press-related articles, and so many other goodies for you to find, including merchandise for the show, the Patreon, and just so many other goodies. You'd be crazy not to check all this stuff out, but mostly, go and have a look at Dan. He totally deserves it. He's working really hard on putting out some incredible content. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will see you next time.